Live from the Bronx, episode 33. We are the podcast that celebrates Bronx creatives and change makers. I'm your boy KB.
What is going on, beautiful people? It is your boy Jay. Before we jump into episode 33, the season finale, y'all already know, hit that subscribe button to stay up to date with everything we have going on. We are streaming on all platforms, and we're on BronxNet. We're on and popping. And y'all know the saying, tell a friend to tell a friend to check us out.
You already know. So today we have a very, very special episode. Like Jay said, this is our season finale, which we are very excited about. The cool thing about having your own podcast is you get to kick it and talk to people who you find interesting. And this brother is a storyteller. He's from the Bronx. He's super dynamic. Please, please, please make some noise for Joel Leon in the building, y'all. Joel, how you feeling?
I'm feeling good. I'm imagining people who are listening are making noise right now, as opposed to the deafening silence that I'm hearing because we're not in front of the studio.
So the cool thing is that we are gonna add our fans to this. We're gonna add effects and all of that.
Yeah, as long as I hear it, so I can just like. I love that.
We got you.
We'll give you the hand clap reaction on Zoom.
Thumbs up.
Look right here. Look.
Perfect. Look at that, man. It's like I'm in front of a crowd. It's awesome. But now I'm good. It's a pleasure to be here with y'all today on this beautiful Saturday morning. So thank you for having me.
Thank you for being
here. No doubt.
Yeah. Of course.
Yeah. So Joel, you just want to echo Kevin's sentiments. Thank you for being here Saturday morning early. It's a beautiful day outside. You could have been anywhere in the world, right? But you're here with us. Shout out to Jigga Man, Kev's favorite rapper. So with all that said, Joel, before we get really deep into all the amazing stuff you do and all the great things that Kevin shared about you in your introduction, we always like to get a sense of who our guest is, and we want the audience to learn a little bit more about you. So with that said, how do you identify? Who are you?
That is a very good question. I think there are layers to the answer, but I'll try to keep it as simple as possible. My pronouns are he, him, and his. For lack of a better term, as Kevin mentioned in the intro, I am a storyteller. So that encompasses a lot of the work that I do as far as my creative practice goes. And my creative practice specifically is centered around using my art and my art medium. So writing, poetry, emceeing, acting, workshop facilitation, speaking, all those other things, but using my art as a means to dismantle and decolonize systems that oppress marginalized communities. I am a father. I am a girl dad. So shout out to the girl dads out there, to two beautiful Black girls. I'm a Bronxite. Born and raised Creston Ave, 188th. You already know. Just here trying to follow my purpose and help others do the same.
So you just mentioned Crescent Ave and where you grew up. Can you tell us a little bit about what your upbringing was like in that section of the Bronx specifically?
Man, I grew, I was born in the 80s, so like shout out to Reaganomics, or not shout out, but to be fair, man, it was some fun times. It was scary times, I might be bouncing back and forth because I think this is a really important question. Because we tend to have a lot of conversations nowadays about like, yo, the old New York, I miss the old New York. And like, I'm gonna keep it a buck. I don't. I remember not being able to get on a train at like certain times of night. I remember stick-up kids. I remember niggas was really wilding back in the day. You know what I'm saying? Like cats getting their chain snatched. Not to say stuff like that doesn't happen now, but we were living in a really volatile time. You know what I'm saying? Like the crack era had already reached its peak. But like you're looking at the era of gangster rap. Like I appreciated growing up in the era, really what I consider the golden era of hip hop. By the time I was in first grade, we're talking about like 1990. We really had already started to see the fermentation of like the Black Power movement of hip hop with, Public Enemies, the Poor Righteous Teachers of the world. You know what I'm saying? The X-Clans of the world. And then a little further, you're moving into, the Biggie, Jay-Z, Nas, Dr. Dre and the Snoop Dogg Chronic era, you know, like there was so much happening. Like the 90s growing up in my section of the hood was just honestly a magical time. Like two-hand touch, you know, in the streets, you know. It was a beautiful time. But like we were all kind of figuring it out, you know what I'm saying? Basketball with the milk crate situation set up, you know, like it was just us really making a way, you know what I'm saying? Like we were the last kid, like my family, we were the last ones really out of my whole crew to get cable, you know. So I got cable by the time we were in 4th grade. So that, like, I've been watching Video Music Box with Robert McDaniels for forever. And then, you know, I had the opportunity, then I could actually watch MTV Jams. I could watch Rap City. Like it was a whole new world of exploration, not just in the streets, but at home. So it was a glorious time, but it was also a scary time too. You know what I'm saying? Like there were shootouts. There was a lot of other stuff that I wish upon no child to have to see, but I wouldn't change it for the world. Like the growing up in the Bronx and on Creston, you know, and then we moved to 190th, 190, literally like 2 blocks over, around middle school. But yeah, it was a beautiful time for sure.
So I've heard other people describe the old New York like that as well. So I was born in like 86. So I caught like the tail end of the 80s, right?
Yeah.
So a lot of that stuff I don't remember, but I've heard people describe what New York was like in the 80s. And some of it sounds like it was wild, like riding the trains after a certain time, certain neighborhoods you don't go to. So how much of that was like normalized, right? How much of it was like, this is just our experience versus how much of it was like, this is really traumatic. Things should not be like that. This is not okay.
I mean, I think a majority of it was normalized, Kevin. I can't imagine a world in which, and you know, I think that's actually an important question because, again, kind of bringing it to present day, we have a lot of conversations nowadays about cancel culture. And granted, I'm not a person who's anti-cancel culture, but what I am anti is not giving people space and room to grow and not having a conversation about forgiveness and accountability in that same conversation, so that we can point a finger at a person, but we can also hold them accountable, right? But then also create space for forgiveness if that person has changed, if that person has grown from that situation. I say that because I think a lot about how different those times were and how folks pretty much, it was normalized. And, you know, again, you had stick up kids, you had chain snatching, purse snatching, you know, like the old, even when you go to think of old New York, like when you go to the Lower East Side now, Lower East Side was a shit show. Times Square was a shit show, you know, and you know, it's weird because as much as it is fuck Giuliani, like if that nigga died tomorrow, I'd be fine. But part of when we look at a cleaner in New York City, a lot of that was Giuliani, man. Like a lot of that was like, unfortunately, a lot of those policies harmed our community greatly and affected our communities greatly and negatively. But when you look at like, because like there was a lot of like broken window policies that were instituted, but I mean, we were drinking in the streets, like that was legal. You know what I'm saying? There was a lot of things that like we were doing that I think maybe put people in danger to a certain extent, but we didn't really think about that. You know what I'm saying? We weren't cognizant of that. We also didn't have the language. I think now in 2020, we have the language to talk about intersectionality and PTSD and the things that we saw and how it affected us. Back in the day, we wasn't thinking about any of that. We wasn't even talking about any of that because we weren't afforded the luxury of having access to that language in order to be able to process the trauma we were seeing and sitting with. You know, it wasn't seen as traumatic. It was like, this is just the way it is. You don't get on the train to go to Brooklyn at 10 o'clock at night unless you know somebody. Like, you don't go to this neighborhood unless you know somebody. Like, that's just how you roll. You didn't even really question why that was a thing or why it had to be a thing. It was just like, this is just how we grew up. But I do think it's interesting when we have conversations about old New York, because I think there needs to be a level of context surrounding what we were okay with, what we weren't okay with, and why we were okay with the things that were happening in the first place. Some of us weren't okay with it, but were too afraid to say anything, you know? It's a lot of levels and layers to it.
I love everything you just said because I was born in 92, so I'm even younger than Kev, right?
Yeah.
So think about this for a second. Joel, you're telling your story and about your experience growing up in the 80s. Kevin was born towards the middle to late 80s, right?
Yeah.
And didn't get a chance to really experience all of it. And then now I'm born in 92 and have
Yeah.
a similar experience right now. It wasn't, my upbringing was crazy, but it wasn't that time period, right?
Yeah.
And some of the same stuff still happened, right? A lot of like when we were growing up, you couldn't go through certain neighborhoods, or like, you know, if you don't know anybody, you don't step through those projects, or you don't step through this neighborhood. Like, you just kind of know this is part of the game and it's normalized. So thinking about this, right, generationally, how we normalize and just kind of pass it down as a way of life.
Yeah.
So we go to 92. Jason is born. Jason is growing up, right? I moved away from the Bronx, came back to the Bronx in 04, right?
Yeah.
And it's just like, this is how you are. It's almost like a manual. This is like how you live and grow up. And you think it's normal until you, for me at least, I left, I went away to college, came back, and I started to see like, oh shit, like this, what I've experienced is not okay. Like, the fact that this school building looks like a jail that I walk into every day is not okay, right? And so I think that piece about having the language and understanding the feelings and being able to process all of that is something I want to pull out and emphasize, because it's really important. We still go through it now. We're passing that down to the next generation. So how do we arm them with that language that you're referring to, right? When we talk about intersectionality, race dynamics, or all these other things that may be affecting them, right? How do we arm them with that knowledge and that language so that they can then share it and break these cycles?
I think that's an important question, Jay. I think it's conversations we're having now. You know, like I think about my nephew. Shout out to Justin. Justin is 20. And him and I are able to have very complex, nuanced conversations I wasn't having with anybody. And granted, I have older brothers who love me, who care for me. My eldest brother, Ski, he got locked up for a bid. He did a 10-year stretch. And so when he came home, I was 17. You know what I'm saying? Like, he missed a lot of like formative years for me. And my older brother, D was kind of like my guiding light. You know, but even D didn't have the language. D and I can have conversations now about a lot of these things we saw growing up because we have the language now. But part of that is being able to do the research, you know what I'm saying, as, you know, as a 5% would say, like, do the knowledge. You know what I mean? Like, a lot of the work for us was listening and learning. I know I can say that it was paying attention to conversations, and if I'm being honest and frank, paying attention to a lot of the conversations that Black women were having, Black femmes were having, the conversations amongst marginalized communities, the conversations indigenous folks were having, like the trans community was having, and seeing where they were pointing out the problems that they had been seeing, honestly, and to be honest, that I think as a community, especially myself as a cis hetero Black man, was not privy to, wasn't aware to, wasn't tapping into. Social media played a big part of that. Social media, as for as many of its pitfalls, I think really opened the door for us to be able to see inside the circles and communities. Like, I just wouldn't walk into a trans community's group. You know what I'm saying? Like, it just wouldn't have happened, you know, at least back in the day. Whereas now you get almost like an inside peek into the conversations to see what the community is talking about. And if you care, if you're compassionate, if you're empathetic, hopefully, because, you know, schools ain't teaching you that shit, but hopefully if you have people who are giving you that level of freedom to explore those terms and that energy, then you get to step into those spaces, hear what people are talking about, and understand that it's bigger than just us. Like, Jay, when you talk about leaving your community, a lot of us don't get to do that. You know, that's such a privilege, which I know you honor because you're doing social work, like, which is, again, like, so important, especially as a man of color. I don't think we recognize how important it is to give folks access to just leave their community.
It's the access piece that you referred to, right? It's like having the ability to have someone in your life who can pass down information in which you can then absorb and continue to pass down.
Part of the work is the cognizance, is being cognizant of the fact that we are a community. And a community also means that we are in communion, right? Meaning that we share substance, we share things with each other. We barter, you know, like, this is very ancestral for us, especially if you're coming from the diaspora. The idea that I have something that is of worth to you and you do as well. And it's an exchange of energy of whatever we're able to share with each other. Like, you know, the reason this is also interesting is because even these past couple of weeks, you know, like I was looking at my savings account, like, oh shit, like this is like I have emergency funds, and not like emergency funds. Like we are good for a decent amount of time. And I'm 37. It took me this my big age to get here, and I think a lot of that was just having to learn, like fuck up a lot. You know what I'm saying? Go fall into delinquency, like past due shit, like all these other things. And it took a while for me to just really settle down. And also, let's be clear, you know, we preach financial literacy to folks, but a lot of folks also do not have the finances in order and able to do so. You know what I'm saying? Like when we look at, even when we look at rent, especially rent in New York, what is it, like 40, like who's affording that with, if you're working a minimum wage job? You know what I'm saying? Like you can't. Like where we hold people to a standard that was created very long time ago, a very white standard, white facing standard that doesn't match what is happening now in present day. Everything else has risen besides like income. And like the variable is that where, as much as things are being priced in a way that is less affordable, the money that we're making is not matching how that's accruing. And so a lot of us are stuck. And it's like, how do you save money in case of emergency? Well, you barely have enough money to pay for groceries, right? And the groceries you're buying are, you know, a little to none, and it's not helping you, and it's not healthy because you're in a food desert, right? And as much as people want to complain about making everything about race and white supremacy, and it's like, but because it is, you know what I mean? Like you can look at history, you can look at today, you can look at the voter suppression shit that's happening right now, literally, like people
Literally right now.
showing up, trying to break windows because Black folks are voicing their right to vote. No different than, you know what I'm saying, like these the Black codes that were installed in order to ensure that folks couldn't move a certain way, couldn't vote a certain way. These practices are no different. The way we redline zone, like districts, the way school districts are set up, the way polling centers are set up, like all this is still a means in which to keep a certain segment of the population disenfranchised and marginalized. So like we can complain to we're blue in the face about folks not doing this and how our communities look. Like this has all been set up on purpose. You know, like the work for us is exactly what you and Jason just did. It's like sharing information, building wealth, and not just financial wealth, but like spiritual wealth together as a community.
How, as people of color, right? How do we move forward when there are so many different kind of agendas and stuff? When I think of like, and this is just me being young, when I think of like the civil rights movement, for example, in my mind, it's kind of romanticized. Like it was like everyone was on one accord. Obviously, that's not true, right?
Yeah.
But when I think of now, I don't even think that we have like people to kind of like, who are we looking to? Should we be looking to people?
Yeah.
And I know this is a loaded question, but I know this is the type of stuff that you write about and think about on a daily. So I would just love to kind of pick your brain about how, as a community, how do we move forward?
I don't think it's as well. I mean, it is heavy, but I think it's a lot simpler than we make it out to be. And you know, like the leader we are looking for is us. We are the leaders, you know. And I remember, you know, mid '90s to late '90s where the conversations were very much about who is it? Like, where's our Dr. King? We spent a lot of time looking for Malcolm, for Dr. King, for, you know, like, you know, Ralph Abernathy, like who's our person? Who's the person that's gonna lead us? And it's us. It's us. Like we are the Fannie Lou Hammers. We are the Ida B. Wells. We are, you know, we are the Ella Bakers. We are the Audre Lordes. We are, you know, we are all these people that we romanticize, these human beings, right? Like an Angela Davis type. Like we are these people. They're human beings who saw an issue and sought ways to rectify it. When I think of present day, when I think of, you know, when I think of Brittany Packnett, when I think of Asia Monet, when I think of Bernice King, you know, shout out to Dr. King's daughter. When I think of the individuals who are showing up on a daily basis, Stacey Abrams, right, who are doing the work, it's not different. It feels different because even when you look at the pictures of the civil rights movement, they're in black and white. It makes it feel very antiquated, right? Like it's far removed from us. You know, you think about the Voting Rights Act, we're looking at what, 65? Like that's not that, it wasn't that long ago. You know what I'm saying? Like a lot of us are just one generation removed from slavery, you know, and I think that's something important to keep in mind. And I think the reason I say it's simple is just like it's everyday things. It's people who signed up to be poll workers. It's folks who are sharing information, correct information, you know, on Instagram and Twitter, Facebook, wherever. Like, or if it's in your community group, like who are you voting for, and being aware of those kinds of things, and supporting those policies that are going to enrich your community, and supporting the people who are really about the community, who are in the community doing the work. You know, supporting Black organizations, Black and brown organizers who are on the ground, again, doing the work consistently. We've been doing the work before this election was taking place. You know, like, to me, that is how we continue to march forward and move forward.
So you said a lot there, and I think one thing that kind of helps to sum up a lot of what you were just talking about, like the importance of understanding yourself, empowerment, community building, unpacking, decolonization, right? All of these different things. When we think about all these things, there's a lot of power in the way in which you identified yourself in the beginning as a storyteller, right?
Yeah.
And we know that a big part of storytelling is almost rewriting your narrative and reclaiming your story to be yours, as opposed to that of the dominant group that has created the narrative for you, right? And so a part of what you're talking about is that process of being able to unpack and get to the root of your own identity, in which you are then able to kind of rewrite who it is you are as Joel, right? As Kevin, as Jason.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit more about that, right? Like what drives you to be a storyteller? What does that mean for you? And we're going to add this extra layer, right? We started talking about the 80s, in which you referred to as the golden age of hip hop, right? Is there any connection between hip hop, maybe your upbringing, and why you also chose to identify as a storyteller in all of your work?
Absolutely. Like, you know, people use the Tupac quote a lot, but I mean, before that, Chuck D had said, like, I might not be Malcolm X, but I hope to be the person that inspires the person who will become the next Malcolm X. And, you know, I think about that quote. I think about Freedom Dreams by Dr. Robin D.G. Kelly, and shout out to Dr. Shamel Bell, who put me on to that book. Freedom Dreams changed my life, because really it's Dr. Kelly's goal was to really examine the Black imagination and how we could use the Black imagination as a way to find liberation amidst this struggle. And he talks very profoundly in early on in the book about art and about poetry specifically, and social justice movements really using poetry and moving like poets move in order to re-examine, reimagine, and decolonize the systems that oppress us. And for me, it was kind of like a light bulb, because it really did help me kind of land on this mission statement that I shared earlier about using my practice to dismantle and decolonize. And to be clear, when I say decolonize, like that also means decolonizing land, right? And redistributing it back to indigenous folks who are the rightful owners of this land. I think for me, that stemmed from hip hop. You know, like that there was that very small window of time, unfortunately, where like Black power in rap was a thing. You know, like when I think about Fight the Power, and even just that video, you know, I think it signifies so much of a moment and a movement for the culture. And I was very moved by that. And then when you move forward, when you look at the backpack era of hip hop, you know what I'm saying? When you look at the you know, Reflection Eternals, right? You know what I'm saying? And when you look at Yassine and, you know, his other cohort, we will not mention because he's problematic as fuck. But there was an era in which like this signified a time of rediscovery of your roots, of your ancestry, of your Blackness. And so for me, the work was it was important to just lean into the work. When I used to rap early on, my raps were they were problematic. I don't know what's going on in the background, y'all. People are celebrating something. I'm assuming. Oh,
I think Biden just
Biden.
Yeah, they announced it.
Take a pause of that. Let me just take real quick. Just make sure I'm not bugging out. But I think because Joe Biden is projected winner of the 2020 presidential election.
Yep.
Yeah,
let's get it.
That's what's up.
Yeah, I heard the noise, and I'm
Yeah.
like, huh. But then I looked down, and I was like, oh yeah.
Yeah, my wife texted me like 15 minutes ago, but we was in a flow, so I didn't want to.
Yeah, I got mad messages. Like I was just like,
Yep.
People celebrate, man. I'm not mad at it. And I mean, I think, but you know, art and storytelling have been, you know, they tell the story of the times. And my job as a poet, when I look at the poets before me who I love immensely, you know what I'm saying? Miri Baraka, you know what I'm saying? When I think of the Audre Lordes and Nikki Giovanni's, the Sanchez's of the world, it's folks who are just telling the story of the times. And for me, that's, again, when we talk about ancestral heritage, that's in my DNA. You know, my mom put books in my hands very early, from the age of like 5, you know, actually earlier than that. And then my brother D, who was just playing everything, any and everything hip hop and New Jack Swing related. Like, some folks just listened to the music and they just loved it. I listened to it, loved it, and wanted to be a part of the culture for whatever reason. You know, I can't really call it, to be honest, because I grew up on the same block with the same kids who were all watching Video Music Box. But part of that was that my brother used to have me record VHS tapes of Video Music Box when he went to work. And so I think there was just a forced, whether he didn't know it at the time, but it was like a forced initiation into the culture, you know. And so I immersed myself in it, and that, I think, allowed me to tell the stories of my upbringing, tell the stories of others I grew up with and grew up around. And so even now, more than ever, I lean into that storytelling because it allows me to tell my story, and then also opens the door for others to do the same. If that makes sense.
What are some albums that you have in your classic album canon?
Black Album, Blueprint, Life After Death, Ready to Die, All Eyes on Me, Illmatic for sure, Return to the 36 Chambers, Brooklyn Zoo. I'm naming a whole lot of 90s records.
I was just gonna say nothing after like 90.
Early 2000. Black on Both Sides. I'm trying to think if there's anything in like the later 2000s that I'm like, okay, this.
What about any of the? What about? And again, he's super problematic now. But what about? I think there's like 2 Kanye projects I would put as classics.
Oh yeah, College Dropout.
College Dropout.
Late Registration for me, for sure. Late Registration, I think, is interesting because there's things that Kanye was doing musically on that album. So College Dropout, Late Registration, and My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy. And I think My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy more so because sonically what Kanye was doing, people would say 808 and Heartbreaks, which I think, you know, when you look at that album, I don't think a 40, right, Drake's producer, really gets to do the things that he gets to do without 808. Like, also, but I think in the same context, you have to shout out Kid Cudi. I was never a fan of Kid Cudi, but I think sonically he influenced a lot of motherfuckers. Like the same way when you look at a Travis Scott now and how he's influencing a lot of folks and how they make music. But my Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy for me sonically is still like one of the. Thank you for pointing it out. I think it is actually one of the greatest albums of all time. Like when you look at all of the lights.
All of the people that are on that track, like I had to look it up. He has Elton John, he has Alicia Keys, he has John Legend, and you don't even hear all of them unless you are like listening.
Yeah.
I think that album cover to cover is almost like a perfect album. Almost.
Yeah, almost. And I remember and I missed MTV doing this. I forget the name of the show, but it was MTV Diary, and they did one on Kanye. And Kanye can draw, like, and you don't even see that really anymore. But he had drawn out the beat patterns he sees in his head. And when I think of My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy, I think of that, like all of the lights. What he was trying to do is create a tapestry of like sonic emotion, like, and so that every voice very much is like an instrument in that song. Like only a genius can do that, you know. Like he got it, he gets it. Which is, it's unfortunate because of where Kanye is now. But yeah, that album, I think, set the bar for what I thought it would set the bar for a lot of how hip hop musically was going to try to pivot in the next direction. But, you know, it didn't. it is what it is. So
let's talk about your TED Talk. So you have a really dope TED Talk where you got to talk about what it's like to co-parent and how we should co-parent and how we should aspire to co-parent are some of the things that I took away from it. So I guess one, you could talk a little bit about what inspired that TED Talk. And also, obviously, you mentioned that you are a father of two girls. Congratulations. That's amazing.
Thank you.
How, in your TED Talk, I guess you talk about how we can, as men, right, we could be kind of emotionally, like how we need to be emotionally available to our children, right?
Sure.
If we haven't had that experience for ourselves, right? Let's say we grew up in a single parent household, or we grew up without our fathers being emotionally present, right? Because there's in some cultures, I'll talk about West Indian culture, like the man will provide financially, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're considered a good man if you can bring, like, I'm making sure that my kids eat, but I don't really, but after that, kind of leave me alone, right? Which is old school, but it still happens in some households.
For sure.
So if you haven't had an experience where you were around an emotionally available and emotionally healthy male, how do you do that for your own children?
Therapy. Prior to therapy, and this is, I try to speak to this often, like it shouldn't take us as men to have daughters in order for us to realize like the work that is required to create safe spaces for women and those who identify as women. And so I say that explicitly because if you are a trans woman, that means you identify as a woman. So like, end of conversation. Therapy helped. I was raised by a single mother in a household where unfortunately I had a father who suffered from some very serious mental health disorders like post-traumatic stress disorder, manic bipolar disorder, bouts of paranoid schizophrenia, and a lot of that related to his stint in Vietnam, a very decorated tour during Vietnam, his own sexual trauma that he suffered from. But I had a mother who was very caring, loving, and compassionate, who, granted, a very Caribbean mother, but a mother who I would almost consider like almost new school for her age at that time. My mom, who didn't want me to be a doctor or a lawyer, she didn't really care for that. She just wanted me to follow my dreams and gave me space to do so without trying to dictate how I got there. And I think that allowed me the freedom and flexibility. My mother gave me autonomy, which is something I try to teach my daughters a lot. Regardless of how young they are, especially my oldest, Lila. Lila is going to be 5. She knows the word autonomy. She doesn't know what it means, but the idea that we can have conversations. She gets to disagree with me. She gets to cry and us talk about that. And Jason used the word, I think that's important earlier. Like we get to unpack like why she's crying, why she's mad, and why she's choosing to express her anger in that way. My mom was not with that shit. Like that wasn't going to happen. There was no space for that. And so I think for us as men, some of us have not grown up with that kind of structure or that dynamic. I can't say necessarily that my mom was preaching like equality and equity in the house. So that wasn't even part of the conversation. It was just me paying attention to what was happening around me. And I don't know how to teach everyone that, unfortunately. We can give people access to the language. We can put them in conversation with others who are living that story, and in hopes that will then compel these individuals to feel like empathy and compassion are the means in which we are creating a more equitable society for all. But you can lead the horse to water, but you know how that goes. Like they can drink it if they want to, and so I think for me the work and what I encourage all brothers to do is like therapy helps us unpack a lot of the trauma, because a lot of that trauma gets in the way of our healing. And once we can unpack that trauma and sift through that, it then allows us to be more empathetic and compassionate across the board. Like the way I treat my daughters is no different than the way I treat my partner, than the way I treat Kevin or Jason. I love everybody. Like it's about equity for all. And so it's not just placed upon children. Like even when I talk about co-parenting, the co-parenting model lives outside of just parents who are separated. It works with parents who are together. It works with guardians, individuals who are in the community, social workers, educators. Like, these are the people who are showing up in these spaces for children. In something I learned from my good friend Ashley Simpo, which she learned from a therapist, which is like, we're not raising children, we're raising adults. Like, our children are going to grow up eventually, God willing, to become Jasons, Kevins, whomever's. So our job is to help them become the adults that they want to be, the human beings that they want to be. And the only way we get there is with empathy and compassion. And for a lot of folks, for a lot of us as men, if it's not therapy, it's healing circles. But there needs to be some level of accountability and ownership of wanting to grow into that space. And then once that happens, involving ourselves in these conversations that don't just involve our own selfish needs, wants, and desires. It's bigger than that. It's bigger than us.
The reason this concept of love is in my head at the moment is because I just finished listening to Dr. Christopher Emdin speak right before this on a virtual event. And he was talking, he essentially asked the question as I think specifically to Black men, but I think this rings true to men of color. He asked the question, do we even love our sisters? Right?
Mm-hmm.
And do we love Black women? Right? Do we even, like, the way we treat them and the way we've moved historically would prove otherwise, right? And so what does love look like for you, and how has that evolved over time? And just generally speaking, whether it's love for your partner, love for your children, love, I would imagine that whatever your definition of love is, it probably exists in all spaces that you move into.
Yeah, I think that is a beautiful question, Jay. So thank you for asking that. There's a few things. I think that is a universal truth. I think that when you look at us as a community of Black men, of men of color, historically, we have not done enough to support Black women. And there will be Black men who will debate that. There'll be Black men who will use examples that do show Black men showing up for Black women, right? And yes, but generally, historically, that has not consistently been the case. And I mean, we can argue, even when I look at conversations on social media, I think there's a very large swath of the male population that thinks they love women, but I think love women only when those women benefit their cause, right? Or their needs or their wants, or these women fulfill some desires, whether it be for another mother, whether it be for a sexual partner, or whether it be for our own passions. Like, it's very rooted in like a self-centered fulfillment, as opposed to a nurturing, giving, reciprocal energy that I think is needed. When I think of love, I think love is all encompassing. I think love is omniscient. I think love is actually conditional. I think unconditional love is actually a falsehood. I think that I can choose to love a person. I love all people, but I also think if you are harmful, if you are toxic, that does not mean I have to still show you love. I attempt to, I create space for empathy and compassion as much as humanly possible, but I'm also a human. And I also think we have to be cognizant of the fact that there are some who will want to do harm intentionally. And I do think love, I think there's unhealthy love. So that I think there are people who do love others, but don't have the language, right? Have not unpacked their trauma. And so that love shows up in very unhealthy, toxic, even harmful ways. But I do think love is forgiving. I think love is compassionate. I think love is empathetic. I think love is open. I also think most importantly, love is fluid. So that love is not, the foundation of love is openness, is vast, so that I can clearly recognize my love is not based on whether I can get something from you or not. That to me, that's not what love is. I think love is creating space for you to be whomever you choose to be, And if that changes tomorrow, my love is not conditional based on that. You know, like there can be conditions to my love, but one of those conditions is not, if you change your truth, then I'm going to stop loving you. There could be other things that decide that, but I think love as fluidity means that we get to show up as who we are, and not as the projections of what we expect others to be for us. You know, it's a lot of things, but I think it's the things I just mentioned is how I would describe love for myself.
And I've never heard love described as conditional, but I think that makes a lot of sense, because I think there's sometimes this idea of unconditional love could be almost used for like manipulation, right? Like, if no matter what you have to love me, you have to stay with whatever BS I'm doing.
Yeah, and I mean, unfortunately, we generally have been the purveyors of that. Like we tout the ride or die, and it's like, why she got to die in order to, like, no, like you don't need to ride or die. You can just ride, or you can not ride at all. If I do some fuck shit, you have the choice to be like, nah, I'm good, I'm out. Like there's this idea that, you know, I get tired of seeing those Instagram posts, man. Like, yo, she was there with me through thick. You know what I mean? No matter what happened, it's like, nah. People don't have to suffer abuse in order to be worthy of love, and they don't have to stay in abusive situations in order to wait for you to get to some mythical, magical place where you finally find yourself and you're not toxic anymore. Like, people have the right to leave, you know. And I think this is why too, when we have conversations about marriage and love nowadays, and why can't people stay in love, and it's like, man, listen, we can get to a whole nother conversation about marriage and the institution of marriage and how that's very much steeped in religious faith and practices, and why, like, marriage in biblical terms had nothing to do with love. It was about procreating, right? And it's about ownership. It's about land. It's about property. It's about all these other things that have nothing to do with love as we've identified it, which is very much a romanticized version that's been given to us by whiteness, right? Like fairy tales. And like, not to say that there's anything wrong with wanting romantic love and having that, and having that kind of love for a partner. But I think, Jason, to your question earlier, love also lives outside the romantic space. Like, love is like love for a friend, love for family, love for your job, love for your career, love for self. That love, the love that I generally talk about, that I write about, has almost nothing to do with the romantic version of it, the romanticized version of it. It's about, how do I love the person next to me? How do I love the person that's standing next to me on the train who's crying? You know, like, I can think of the times I've been on the train where people get uncomfortable when you see someone struggling with something, or you see a person who's clearly going through pain. It's like, how has society conditioned us to not want to reach out to our neighbor to make sure that they are loved, that they are seen, that they are understood? You know, like, for me, that's the work. The reason I get to do that, though, is because I've been able to unpack my trauma. You know, like, we're blocked. Our chakras are blocked because society hasn't taught us that, especially as men, that emotions are okay. In fact, emotions are a human trait. It's not conditioned based on masculine or feminine. It's the humanity of us that wants to cry out for help, that wants to seek help, that wants to help others. Like, that is our innate want. It's inherently in us. I think society has conditioned us to think we don't want that. In fact, that we want otherwise, which is false.
Yeah, and I think to your point, right? It's a lot of men, right? And men of color, right? Specifically, we are conditioned to believe that love has to be based in power or silence, right? And this also wise words from the big homie, right? Chris Emden, and so, which I think rings true when we actually think about it, right? To all of your points, why do we think that love means you need to die for me or go through this abuse, right? To mean that you actually love me, right? And so at whatever moment you feel like this ain't it, you should be able to walk out the room. So and just leave the situation, the relationship, whatever that is. So I love that you broke it down in that way, because there are all these misconceptions of what love is that women also subscribe to. So that's why they do go through that, right? And that is conditioned, right? So thank you for sharing that, because I think that we need to hear this. People need.
And like, you know, and I also like to add too, like, and this is not bashing black men of color. Like, I think also too, we tend to get feedback and we get on the defensive about, oh, well, you saying I'm not doing this. And like, if you don't feel like this pertains to you, it probably does. But if you feel like it doesn't, then you don't need to be offended. Brothers, like, I see this all the time, again, especially on social, where it's like black women would say, like, we don't feel seen, we don't feel heard. And black men come in like, what do you mean? I'm doing this. Like, brother, that applies to you, that's fine. But if you hear, like, for whatever reason, we seem to miss how we tend to all lives matter situations when black women and women of color are speaking out about the things that they have seen, witnessed, and been a victim of. It becomes, well, not all black men, not all me and my man. It's like, hey, that's great, that's cool. How are we ensuring that the voice, the person that is willfully saying I'm in pain, how do we heal that? You know what I'm saying? Because the conversation is not about what you're doing, it's about what they are needing. And so if we pivot from that, which is, again, that's all ego. Like, oh, I feel like, well, you mean I'm not doing this, I'm not doing that. Well, if you are, then, fix it. You know what I'm saying? Like, but again, trauma doesn't allow us to see ourselves clearly in the mirror and say, okay, there's work that I need to do, and being okay with that. And also recognizing that we don't have to identify with the self that is being harmful to people. And meaning, if I don't have to attach myself to the behaviors, right? Like, just because I've hurt a person, right, doesn't mean I'm a bad person. People hurt people. Like, even if you're in love with a person, you are going to hurt that person eventually in some way, shape, or form. Doesn't mean you cheat, doesn't mean you beat them, but you can say something harmful because, again, you're human. And so I think the more we can give ourselves grace and forgiveness of recognizing the mistakes I made does not mean that I'm a mistake. The bad I've done does not mean I'm a bad person. It is a behavior I'm exhibiting, I'm projecting, whatever things that I've learned from my community, from my people. And so I need to find more appropriate ways of being in the space with the people I love. Like, that's not a blame thing. It's I'm holding myself accountable for the things I'm not doing, or the spaces that I lack in, and I want to grow. If I want to grow, defensiveness is the last place I go to. Like, if I want to grow, that means there's still more that I need to learn, so that when I hear a black woman say, I need help, my immediate thought isn't, oh, well, I'm helping you already. My immediate thought is, okay, what else can I be doing? Simple. And we can have this conversation, and then we can come to an agreement that maybe I am doing what I need to be doing, and maybe you on the other end also need to heal to recognize that, or wow, I still have a long ways to go in order to ensure I'm not harming this person I care about. Then we can keep moving forward, and we can find more equity in the spaces we share with each other.
And I think everything you said is spot on too, because even if you feel that you're at a place where, like, there's no more learning or no more growing, that you're already coming at it from a really toxic position. And the other part of it is, even if you feel like you are where you need to be, whatever, quote unquote, whatever that means, chances are some of your homies aren't. There's someone in your circle, one of your cousins, one of your friends, someone. So I definitely hear what you're saying. So you talked a lot about social media. So I want to kind of jump into your social media presence. Yeah. So you have a really dope and dynamic social media presence.
Thank you.
It's funny. A lot of people who I know in different walks of life repost a lot of the things that you have on Twitter and stuff like that. And a couple of things that I noticed about your posts. One, they are just super, like, positive and encouraging, especially for people of color. And it's almost hard to imagine where you come up with the strength and the fortitude to kind of have some of these posts and these ideas and these feelings, especially with where our country is, right? So depending on when you're listening to this, actually by the time you're listening to this, Biden is going to be our new president. Shout out to Biden Harris. We actually just found out while we were recording it, so I'm gonna probably leave this in the episode, not edit it out. But so that's dope. But if you look at the map, right, half the country still voted for this moment. Like, half the country still voted for Trump, right? So there's a whole bunch of things that are not going well for people of color, for trans people, for women. For how are you able to kind of still remain so positive, and how are you able to use your social media presence to kind of spread some of this encouragement and positivity?
I think it's twofold. It's one, recognizing, again, and I've been saying this word a lot, and shout out to Sharon Salzberg. She just published a book called Real Change, which I had the honor of being mentioned in. But in the book, she shares an antidote that she got from a Buddhist practitioner, and part of that is like compassion, and how really compassion is active. Empathy is the space we hold. Like, I empathize with the person. I see what you're going through. I care for you. I share this pain. Compassion then puts that into action. And so when I think about compassion and empathy, I'm thinking of the two pillars that, and grace. I mean, I think that allows me to then show up in spaces and give room for others to be whom they are without judgment, without bias. And granted, I'm human, so it shows up from time to time. But I think for me, and I think Buddhism has played a really big part in that, is leading with intention, leading with kindness, are just kind of the foundation for how I show up for the work. But I also recognize that even with that, in that same breath, I don't focus my energy on these motherfuckers, like on the racist Trump supporters who are not for, you know, I don't want to say they're not going to change, but in all likelihood, they're not, right? And so it's something I've been preaching for a few years now. It's like, not everyone's going to make the trip. Like, not everyone gets to make it on the boat. And so not everyone wants to. And so my job, my goal is really to galvanize the folks who are doing the work. And it's something I've been saying a lot this year, which is like, it's not about turning racist into anti-racist. I think for me, it's about giving anti-racist bullhorns so that, you know, the message is it reaches further.
I'd like to do a quick game that we call rapid fire. So the way it is going to work, Jay is going to throw out 5 questions, and you are going to tell us the first word or words that come to your mind. Don't think too much on it, and it's meant to be fun. So, Jay, you ready?
I'm ready. You ready, Joel?
I'm ready, man. I'm ready. Let's go. Let's do it.
Let's do it. Who is your biggest influencer?
Dwayne, my brother D, I think.
Yeah. What is one word to describe your method of storytelling?
Love.
What is your all-time favorite book?
The Parable of the Sower by Octavia Butler.
What is your favorite thing about being a father?
My kids smile.
This last one, we're gonna get off script a little bit because I think this piece is important. What is one word of advice you would give to listeners?
Trust the love that you are given. You know, I think we spend so much time with our defenses up, questioning the people that come into our spaces. And I understand that for me, that the work is really rooted in, when we talk about creating spaces, like, I'm not going to assume that anything that you're giving to me is done out of a negative space. Like, I'm going to assume that you're leading with love until you prove me otherwise. And so when people, even simple things, like when people give me compliments, I would immediately deflect. And instead of saying thank you, I'd be like, yo, like, you could be like, yo, Joe, that was really dynamic. And I'd be like, yo, Jay, what you said, yo, Kevin, but look at what you're wearing. Like, it'll be all these other things, which would still be true, but it wouldn't be me trusting the love that I was given. It would be me immediately having to feel like I needed to reciprocate, as opposed to saying thank you, or I appreciate that, or I receive that. And it was something someone had told me. It's like denying the gift that they were giving us is denying the gift of God. And I mean, they didn't say it as eloquently as I just said it now, you know, but the idea that, but it is, it's like that if we are not receiving the gifts that are given to us by the people who care about us, who are telling us that they care about us, we're denying the opportunity to be receiving of God, whomever and whatever God form takes shape for us. So trust the love that you're given, you know, you don't have to question it.
This was so dynamic, so powerful. You definitely gave me things to kind of think about. For the listeners, please go check out this brother's TED Talk. Please, we didn't even get to talk about some of his work on the Medium, but please check out his writing on the Medium. He is super talented. Go buy his books. Go listen to like. He's a really dope brother, and I'm inspired by him, and I'm a fan of the things that you do.
I mean, and thank you, Kevin. And before we go, man, I do want to shout out both you and Jason. Like, working in education, working in the spaces that you both are working in is no easy task. Working in the Bronx is no easy task. I mean, especially when we look at the lack of resources, and unfortunately, and so there are young ears and young hearts that need the energy from brothers such as yourselves. And so I applaud y'all for doing the work, work that really oftentimes is not celebrated enough, recognized enough, or acknowledged enough. So shout out to y'all. You know, it's important.
Well, thank you so very much. So for the
Sure.
fans who are listening, if they want to continue to follow you, where can they find you? If you could throw out your social media for the people.
Yeah, super easy. I am Joel Leon on Instagram, Joel aka MAG on Twitter, on the Twitter. But yeah, that you'll find the posts, you'll find the medium.com writing, you'll find the affirmation stuff, the links to upcoming performances. There's a quick shout out. There's a celebration with Michael Eric Dyson happening on the 12th with City College that I'm honored to be a part of. I'll be performing for. So you can you'll see that information posted on my social. But stuff like that, man. I'm accessible, so DM, all that other good stuff.
No doubt. And Jay, can you throw out our social media for the people, please?
Yes, sir. First of all, I just want to say thank you again for joining us, and thank you for the positive sentiments and the compliments as well. Keep doing what you're doing, folks. Follow this man. He's killing the game. He's doing amazing work. You can, regarding our social media, you can follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. Hit those subscribe buttons at Live from the Bronx. You can follow us on Twitter at Live from the BX. And we are streaming on BronxNet every other Monday at 9:30 p.m.
Episode 33 and the season finale. We just have to say a huge thank you to our listeners. Thank you for rocking out with us. Thank you to all of the guests who have been on the show. And thank you again, Joel. Episode 33, season 1. We did it, y'all.